Here we go. We are live. What's up? What's up? Happy Valentine's Day. Yay. I'm Carolyn J. Carpenter, one of the founders of Hollywood Gatekeepers. I'm here today to talk about love. Love and rom-coms because it is Valentine's Day. I love that our training landed on Valentine's Day. Thanksgiving and Valentine's Day are my two favorite holidays. Well, I guess Valentine's Day isn't technically a holiday, is it? But celebrations maybe is a better word for it. Because I mean, I know a lot of people go, "Oh, it's all about couples," and if you're not a couple, blah blah blah. It doesn't. That's how they sound in my head. But I just, it's about love. Life is love. We need as much love as possible. That's why we do this. And I love how we've had guests that come in. Brooks Elms in particular has been like, you guys are so heart centered. Everything you do is so heart centered. I just love that someone noticed that because we're really all about that. So it's perfect. It's perfect day to talk about rom-coms and love and log lines and love and all of that. So we recently did a pitch event, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit today because now we've turned that pitch event into a new course. So you can take a course on pitching. And so we had a great time. It was really interesting. We just dove in and we tried a bunch of things. And like I always do, like we kind of like, we make a plan. We have a plan, but then we're not too married to it. Valentine's Day joke. We're not too married to the plan. We want to make sure that we're, open to trying things. And so some really cool stuff happened. So we ended up deciding to turn that into a course, and that is available now starting today. So I'm really excited. That's starting today. That will be available. But we're going to dive in and talk about this because from that event, we talked about pitching and we talked about log lines and the idea that log lines, understanding how to put together a log line is kind of the first step to putting together a pitch, and how when you seamlessly can start to really understand log lines, you can start to understand pitches. So we're going to talk about, and then we're going to talk about rom-coms because it's Valentine's Day. So we're going to use just a couple of rom-coms to give you an idea of what I'm talking about. But first, we're going to go through what are the elements of a rom-com. Hey there, hi there. Aw, I love the hearts. So what are the elements of a rom-com? Now, there's lots of different genres. We have a whole thing that we do on genres where we break them down into a bunch of different subgenres and form genres and different ways that you can categorize things to help people really understand all the different nuances of genres. And then we have training specifically in each genre so that if you are someone who wants to be a reader and you want to specialize in a genre, you have an extra tool that you can really double down on what creates a horror film, what creates a thriller, what are the things that are in that genre that might not necessarily be in another genre. One of the most common things I see as a reader that young or new people that are just starting to write, one of the mistakes I commonly see is what I call genre jumping, where they're in one genre and then I just sort of imagine that they have the thought, wouldn't it be cool if? And whenever they have that kind of thought, it's a shifting kind of thought. It's not like maybe our characters should, like they're not staying in there. They're like, oh, maybe they're reaching for something else. And then often they reach for a different genre. So they not realizing it. They're like, wouldn't it be cool if a spaceship landed? Or wouldn't it be cool if, now it's sci-fi when a minute ago it was historical drama, so it's like, wouldn't it be cool if, someone's head blew off or whatever? It's like, okay, now we're into horror, where a minute ago we were, something else. So it's not uncommon to see that with people that are just starting to write, because especially in the middle, gets hard in the middle, and trying to keep the action and trying to keep things going, people will genre jump to try and keep the things going. So we're double downing on really letting you understand what are the different genres and what is expected of each genre. Rom-coms are, I think, probably my favorite genre, honestly. And, they had a heyday. They call it the heyday genre of the 80s and 90s, but it's coming back around again in a kind of different way. I love some of the new romantic films that are coming out. It's really interesting. And so romantic comedy is a little bit different than romantic drama, obviously. So, but we're going to dive into what are the elements of a romantic comedy. So, and I'd love to hear if you, this is always an exchange. I'm just sharing information that I have learned. I love it when you have information that you have learned. I just love the whole thing. Like, we share with each other. It's not like this is the way it is ever, because that's ridiculous. There's so many ways to do things. Like, that would be my only thing of like, this is the way it is that there is no way. There's a million ways to do everything. So these are the things that I have seen after reading 11,000 screenplays. These are some of the, the things that we look for in a romantic comedy. But again, knowing the rules, those rules, so then you can play and break and play with it. So some of the elements of a romantic comedy, So yes, Miss Larissa, may I please give a shout out to Lisa Frankenstein and her logline, a coming of rage story about a teenager and her crush who happens to be a corpse. That is fantastic logline. That is a huge shout out. I love it. Thank you for doing that. I love it. You're so awesome. So romantic comedies, here's some of the things that you look for in a romantic comedy. They are typically high concept, meaning I mean that's a really great example of that logline, meaning the you get it. Like you immediately get, the situation. So it's a high concept idea. They're usually not very tricky. They're pretty straight ahead. So high concept means that it's very easy for people to relate to. It's like you don't have to explain it. We're like, Jaws, a shark attacks a town. It's like really simple. People get the story. That's high concept. So, and rom-coms are typically pretty high concept because it's not so much the premise, although this logline is actually a great premise. Her coming of age story is about a teenager and her crush happens to be a corpse. Like that makes it, it gives it a twist, right? So it's something easy for us to understand. They're usually shorter. Comedies in general, screenplays run 1 minute per page. So if you have a 90-page screenplay, it's a 90-minute movie. This is a way that we can all, no pun intended, sort of intended, stay on the same page and know like how long is the film. It's a way when we start to share that film to get funding, we know how long the movie is going to be and we can speak that language. So they are typically shorter. Rom-coms, comedies in general are typically shorter and they run about 90 pages. If you get down to 80, that you can get down to 80, but anything less than that, now you're getting into short film territory. But typically around 90 is good. 85 to 105 is what you would see. The leads are usually very likable. We root for them. We recognize them. We want them to win. There are some that kind of play with different forms of that where you don't necessarily like the characters, but there's something compelling about you wanting them to get together. A lot of writers explore these themes of people being likable, unlikable. Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. Some of the subplots that are happening in that are the characters are likable, but they're not treating each other very well. There's some really interesting. I absolutely love that movie, but obviously that is such a layered film, and you could. Is that a romantic comedy? Is that a romantic drama? That's one where you can kind of look at the difference, what a difference a tone will make, right? So, but typically in a romantic comedy, we really like the people that we're watching. They're very easy to like. They're easy to root for. They're if they have angst, it's comedy, right? We're keeping things light. So we're really recognizing we're dealing with the person's neurotic tendencies or whatever they might be. It's all just kind of light. But that's not to say you can go serious in a romantic comedy and you can pull on some serious heartstrings, the big sick. It's like that's a pretty serious theme that they have going there. And there's some very heartfelt moments, but in general, it stays very light, right? You also, and this is really interesting concept, and Jeff Arch, who wrote Sleepless in Seattle, like, a master, obviously. I remember hearing him say this, and then he talks about this. He wrote Sleepless in Seattle, and he talked about the idea of you want to make sure that when you introduce a character, so if you're going to introduce two people in a romantic comedy and one of them is in a relationship, you want to be sure to introduce the person they're supposed to end up with first. so that you get like that this is who they're meant to be with. So you have to be careful with that. If you're going to have a situation where someone, like in Sleepless in Seattle, she's already with someone, she's with Bill Pullman, right? And they have actually a fairly okay relationship, right? She gets his jokes. She thinks he's funny. Like you can kind of see how they got together, but there's something just deeper pulling her. And so it's actually very poignant and sweet the way that is handled. But you meet Tom Hanks early on. So you're so rooting for that union, right? So you have to be kind of careful with that. While You Were Sleeping is one, Bill Pullman again. So While You Were Sleeping, who would think of him as being the rom-com guy, right? But he is, right? So she has a big crush on Peter Gallagher's character, but that's not who she ends up with. But in that case, we don't really meet Peter Gallagher's character until well into, like, we don't really get who he is. She just has a fantasy about him, and that's different. It's not like they're in a relationship. So, but if someone's going to break up, you want to make sure that you set up kind of where the person's supposed to be to some degree so that we're not rooting for the wrong person. And sometimes it can be sort of nebulous. Something's got to give where she's choosing between Jack Nicholson and Keanu Reeves. I know many of my friends were like, what are you thinking? Wait a minute. You didn't choose Keanu? Wait, what? but in the, in the realm of the story and the realm of what they have in common, all of that, if you think about that on the page before it's cast, you're thinking about all the elements that go into it, right? So you can play with these rules and things for sure. But especially if you're a new writer and you're just learning how to write, or it's your first or second screenplay, kind of sticking within the guidelines will help you get that solid first draft, and then you can play around and you can play with these themes for sure. And so you want to make sure that that the audience sees who they're supposed to be with. And then you have what's known as a meet cute, the fancy, funny, like quirky way that they meet in a romantic comedy. Often, sometimes it can be as simple as Harry met Sally. They drive across the country together. Like that's a really, same thing. The Sure Thing, they meet like that as well. They're taking a road trip across the country. And so it is like they can meet on something very simple like that, or the old I tripped over a curve and there he was, that whole thing. There's that. So having them meet in an interesting way. And then it's often based, a lot of romantic comedies are based on a lie or a misunderstanding, at least. Made in Manhattan, she's not the maid. She lies and says she's not the maid. She pretends to be somebody else. Pretending to be somebody else. How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days. They're both lying. And so then it becomes like, who's going to reveal the lie first, right? So then it's like they're both really stubbornly sticking to their thing that they're trying to do. They're both trying to make the other person leave them, but they have trying to prove that they can be the one to make someone leave them, right? So it's like it's a great idea, right? So but usually, or at least often, there's some sort of lie involved or some sort of misunderstanding in that regard. So there's some piece of information. Crazy Rich Asian, she doesn't realize the extent of his wealth until she goes over there, right? So there's usually some sort of piece of information that's either been left out or is an outright lie, or it's like just something that gets out of hand and then they just let it go too far. There's all kinds of miscommunications that happen in a romantic comedy typically. And then one of my favorite things about romantic comedy is that supporting cast. The supporting cast is so important and so lovely. And they bring a lot of the humor. They can typically in a romantic comedy, the leads are sort of straight people, and all around them, like a straight man, meaning that's a term for someone who's not the one making the joke. They're the one that's standing there reacting to the joke. And so typically in a romantic comedy, the two characters that are in the love story aren't all that wacky. It's everyone around them that's all wacky. And that's just a part of the genre. And I think it's what makes it really fun. Notting Hill has one of the best ensemble pieces. I talk about this all the time, but one of my favorites is 5 Year Engagement. That ensemble, the two ensemble is so brilliantly done, because the movie is just about how they open the thing and they get engaged. And so it's supposed to be just about them getting engaged and getting married. And then all kinds of havoc happens and they can't seem to get married. Like all these things happen and it becomes this 5-year engagement. But meanwhile, at their engagement party, her sister and his sous chef, he's a chef, they hook up. And then she gets pregnant and then they end up getting married. And so in the 5 years that the two of them were supposed to have this life, the two supporting characters have the life that they were supposed to have. He ends up, even the sous chef moves into the guy's job. Like they take over their lives. And it's so fantastic. And it really like mirrors beautifully what the two characters are supposed to have. And these sub characters are living the lives they were supposed to have. I think I actually think that's kind of a flawed movie, but that is brilliant. And the actors are Chris Pratt and Allison Brie are amazing in that. So definitely that's one I would recommend. It's really fun. And it's just really fun to see what people come up with. The side characters in Crazy Rich Asians it's like really great, really fun. The families on both sides are just, and her friends, it's all really interesting. And then they have, You Complete Me, the epic one-liners. Cameron Crowe is famous for these. I gave her my heart, she gave me a pen. Like he's famous for those just beautiful one-liners. Jerry Maguire has several. And Jerry Maguire, it's interesting. Like I wouldn't typically put that into a romantic comedy because the main storyline isn't necessarily the romance. The main storyline is Jerry Maguire trying to match his life to his values. Basically, his values change, and now he's trying to match his external world to his new internal life. Now, it's a romantic film for sure, and obviously his relationship with her is a big part of it, but it isn't just that. But in a romantic comedy, you also want to be able to say, okay, if I were to take the romance out, do I still have a solid story? And you want to have a solid story even with or without the romance, where Jerry Maguire obviously has that, but it has it so much that I wouldn't really deem that a romantic comedy, because it's not really about will they, won't they. It's not really about that. But a romantic comedy will have those epic moments of I'm just a girl asking a boy to love her, those kinds of lines, right? They have kind of a music video style. Often they're very choppy, the way they're edited. They're very bright. Usually the colors, it's a comedy and it's romance. So usually the colors are very bright and colorful, and the look of it has that feel to it. And it might have sort of a music video feel. You don't see this as much anymore because it's been used so much, it's become a trope, but montages showing them falling in love or showing them break up, right? It's a way, montages are one of the easiest way to denote passage of time. So you'll see a montage of seasons, right? Where they're doing a Halloween party, and then they're dragging the Christmas tree, and then suddenly it's snowing, and then suddenly it's spring. Like, they're doing seasons, they're doing events and that kind of thing to show passage of time. So that's a super common thing inside of romantic comedy, so much so that now it's become, so cliche that people aren't using it quite as much. And the old, they do beautifully in Pretty Women, where she's, with the clothes and she's trying on clothes. Trying on clothes is a big one because it's just a fun way to show how beautiful the leads are, that kind of thing. So you might have those kind of montages that also move the story forward. And then the point of no return in a romantic comedy is typically some sort of realization. I actually do love this person. I have fallen in love with them. Now what am I going to do? In Sweet Home Alabama, she goes to sign her divorce papers and she can't get her hand to do it. Right. So it's like these moments of, and actually Sweet Home Alabama is a good one where you do meet the wrong person first, but you kind of know right out the gate, right? When she gets home, there's just a shift. Then you realize, oh, okay, here's where we're going to go with this. And he's not a bad guy, but we don't really get to know him as well, and then they bring in his mom, who's a bit of a villain, Candice Bergen, and she's amazing. And so because there's this villainous storyline that has to do with his family, we're setting up that we want her to, stick with her high school sweetheart or whatever that relationship is, right? So I hope this is making sense so far. And then there's typically some sort of chase. We got to run to the airport. Oh no, Notting Hill, they all get in the car. I've made a horrible mistake. I need to go catch her before she leaves. Even though it's like, well, you could just call her the next day, but still, we got to run to the airport. We got to Love Actually. We got to run, we got to run to say goodbye. Like, it wasn't even like, they were kids. So it's like, there's this chase, I'm going to stop. I'm going to, before they fly out of my life, I'm going to make sure to stop them. And now it's interesting how, because that was such a device of the 80s and 90s, now with the new way we communicate, technology is one of the biggest things that dates a film now. So the way that we communicate now, someone like flying away doesn't have the same kind of weight to it that it did back in the 80s. When someone flew away, it was a big deal to try and get to them again. It's like you had to follow them, you had to drive out there, you had to write a letter. Like it wasn't like you just like, hey, catch them on Facebook. Like you didn't have that ability, right? So in order to encompass the way things have changed now, you have to be more creative in how the end of the thing needs to be something more permanent than just their getting on a plane. Nowadays, it has to be like, well, The Graduate, that's still an older film, but they're getting married, right? It's got to be something that's, really significant that causes them to chase after the one that they love. And there's a good balance of humor and heart. You want to have, it needs to be funny. It is a comedy, but you want to pull on the heartstrings. I think Crazy Rich Asians does this beautifully. The relationship between the grandmother, the mother, we think the mother's the villain, and then we really learn it's the grandmother that's sort of the villain, right? But that with every character having a bit of a change, having a bit of an arc, like that makes it so much better when all the characters are having some kind of change, right? It makes it really a lot more interesting. And the two things that I think are present in all films that do well is that they are universal and they're authentic. And so when films are universal and we all can kind of relate to them, it doesn't matter if it's people, it doesn't matter if it's an animated, it's an animated candle. Like it doesn't matter. We have that in Beauty and the Beast, right? It doesn't matter what the character is. It matters that they're talking about the human condition, right? So the fact that they're doing that and we can relate to them, it's universal, and that it's authentic. We believe it. We believe that this could happen, where even if it's outrageous, we can still go along for the ride. So even, in Hangover, it's a comedy. It's not, well, it has some romance, but it's a comedy. But we can believe that they're going to steal a cop car and stuff. We're going to go with it, right? So because it's super authentic, even if it's outrageous, doesn't necessarily mean that it needs to be like something that could happen in your life. It means that we're going to buy that this thing's happening, right? Because the characters are reacting in an authentic fashion and we can kind of go with them. So when you think about pitching a romantic comedy or talking about romantic comedies or films in general, um, there's a formula that I think is I did a lot of research. I have my own formulas that I've used, but I found this one that I think is so simple and so to the point that I love just sharing this. And this is when a protagonist, whoever your protagonist is, suffers whatever the inciting incident is, they must achieve a goal before something important happens. And this is from a young man, Tyler Mowry. He has a YouTube channel. Highly recommend. He's got lots of great stuff on there. So I definitely want to give him credit for that. I did not come up with this, but it's one of the most simple ways of getting it across. And you'll see one of the things that people often don't get. And actually, Larissa, with the log line that you have, it's beautiful and you can really see it, but we get who happens to be a corpse is such a great twist. But I love that he adds before stakes, right? So maybe, whatever happened, he's a corpse. So they have to, she has to have this relationship work before what he disintegrates, or I don't know what what is the ticking clock or what is the thing. And I love that he adds that because a lot of people don't, and that can make a lot, although this log line works, sometimes it works in this way. And I'm going to give you an example. So a huge movie star, she's the protagonist, and you don't need to give a character name. Like it's not important to give the character's name. It doesn't really matter unless it's a famous person that you're talking about that we all, Barbie, we're going to know who that is, right? But other than that, it's more important to know kind of who they are than it is to know their name. Names don't really matter. I don't even know what her name was in that movie. A huge movie star and an unassuming bookshop owner try to find love before her fame ruins their chances. So her fame and her being so famous is what keeps derailing them. She keeps having to, she's wearing a headphone and someone's listening. So she pretends like she's not interested because she's so worried about press and all of that, that it's just put so much strain on the relationship that he finally says, I don't want to be the partner of someone so famous. It's too hard. So it's like, that's a real thing. It's really difficult for celebrities to have regular relationships, right? And I think it captures it beautifully, and it captures it in his family. The sub characters are so great in the way that they react to her, where some don't even care or know who she is, and some are just completely starstruck. And that's super universal and very authentic. So you see how it's like, but there's this ticking clock, there's this thing, and so that example works really well. And then every once in a while, you're going to come up with a story. And we worked on this in our pitching event that we did together. And you're going to come up with a story that might not fit in with that. And so we were together as a team during the pitch event doing Harry Met Sally. I was having everybody work together on log lines because there's something about that communal thing that makes it easier. You'll learn it a little bit better. And we realized with Harry Met Sally, because it's such a unique story, that the log line doesn't really fit that kind of formula. This kind of log line could work. Two mildly neurotic people. They meet and they hate each other. Then they meet and become friends, and then they meet and fall in love. And where we got to that was that's what she says at the end of the movie. She says, "Well, the first time we met, we hated each other. The second time we met, we became friends, and the third time we met, we fell in love." And it's so beautiful, right? You want to go like, oh, I want to see that. Like you want to see that progression because that film has a slow burn, right? It's not like the typical, he does have a bit of a chase. He goes chasing, it still has the things, and he does this he realizes on New Year's that he loves her. So he has this realization, and then he has to chase her down. And so it has, when you realize that you love someone, when you want your forever to start right now or whatever it is. So he said, great iconic line, but he has that theme that everybody, recognizes from When Harry Met Sally. And, of course I'll have what she's having. Like there's lines in there that, everyone quotes. So, yeah, you don't want to spoil it. It's such a good movie. Yeah. So that's an interesting point, Ms. So sometimes in a log line like this, you don't want to spoil it when you're doing, so that's different. So I'm so glad this came up. Thank you. So she's putting this log line. So she's enticing us all to watch this film, right? That's a little bit different than where you're going to give a log line. If she were to give this log line in a pitch, you'd want the producers to know what happens. Like you don't worry about spoilers so much in a pitch because they're deciding, am I going to put, hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars into this film? So you can have it, just give the information straight ahead. So, if you're trying to sell it, it can be a little bit different. So I hope this all makes sense. And I also want to let you know, so we do have a course available where we dive into this. It's just, we're releasing it today. I'm still making a few tweaks on it, actually, even like it's that fresh off the press that we are releasing this today. It is a course that we created out of the live event we did a few weeks ago, where we really dive into log lines, and then how log lines, when you develop a log line, then it's much easier to go from there to develop your pitch. Because if you really dig into that log line, and we spent some time like figuring out a log line, and then we kind of walked through how we created a pitch out of that log line. It was really fun. And so I wanted to share that with you today. Just Like Heaven is Brian's absolute favorite rom-com. I don't know that I've seen that one, actually. So I love it when you guys suggest movies, because I literally have a list that I add them to. So fun. Yeah, really good. So to not be too specific, the ticking clock they have is to finish him and escape before she gets arrested for methods by which she sourced his missing body parts. So good, right? So you see how that leads into the pitch, right? So if she's pitching this, she can say, she just did it just naturally. She can say, she's pitching in a way. Here's the ticking clock. So she didn't want to put it in the log line because it's a spoiler. She doesn't want to give too much away, but she's going to give you the info, right? And that's why log lines are a really good gateway into figuring out your pitch when you're going to pitch something. When you start with your log line and you're like, here's the main information. We need to know who the protagonist is. We need to describe that person, whether it's a disgruntled chef or, overwhelmed boss or whatever. Like, we need to know who that person is, and then who they fall in love with, the same kind of thing, meets a corporate woman forces her lowly assistant to marry her so that she can keep her status in America before they send her back to Canada, right? So that's the proposal. So it's Sandra Bullock. She's the protagonist. She's a corporate woman, right? She forces her inciting incident that she forces Ryan Reynolds' character, her lowly assistant, to come to Canada and get married that's in America. She forces him to propose so that she doesn't get sent back to Canada. So it's like a really great ticking clock. It's got all the things, right? So it's a really great way. It's so easy, right? So then you're like, okay, there is the story. And then that can introduce you into, so she ends up going to and meeting his whole family. And then the lie just grows and grows and grows, where they're like, and then as the family embraces her, and she's such a stoic corporate person, and he really hates her because she's so mean to him all the time, but he really knows her too, because he's her assistant. So he knows everything about her life, right? So then as she starts to soften, because the family is so welcoming, she can't help but start to soften. And so then he starts to see her softer side. He already knows all of her awful things. And so now he can start to see the beautiful things about her. And then he can realize that these things that he didn't like, they're not that big of a deal as in comparison to who she actually is. This beautiful story with Reese Witherspoon. Oh, thanks, man. I'll definitely check that out. So I hope this is helpful. Definitely dive into the pitch event if you want, or the pitch course if you want to learn more about turning a logline into a pitch. I hope this is helpful when you go, write your next romantic comedy. And have a beautiful, lovely Valentine's Day. Spread the love. Go watch a rom-com. Have a beautiful, lovely day. I love doing these. I hope this is helpful to you, and we'll talk at you soon. Have a great day.